Monday, we're also having an all-day meeting on the electricity sector. So we wanted to just give an overview before we open it up on what we're thinking about to do under Section 3D of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And I think this table provides the best summary. So you've heard earlier today that we are required to adopt a number of regulations that actually result in annual declining limits in greenhouse gases. And we have identified a number of sectors that you've heard about. This is what we are thinking about now, but we are definitely looking for more stakeholder input. We've heard from a number of folks on the different sectors. But I want to cover what's here. We are thinking of a number of sectors, transportation sector, the electricity sector, methane leaks from the gas distribution sector, that was the session we just had, and then finally gas-insulated switchgear, that was our first session of the day. So on the transportation sector, there are a number of things we are pursuing or are already on the books. The first is we are going to get reductions from greenhouse gas standards for motor vehicles. We are looking for additional reductions from the transportation sector and have been working with our partners at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. We had a session earlier today at 1 o'clock on that and heard some good ideas. And then finally on transportation, we will be looking at ways that we can improve the greenhouse gas performance of the state fleet and actually impose declining caps. And that can be through more efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, other plug-in types of vehicles. So that's what we're thinking of there. On the electricity sector regulations, this is a topic we're going to be diving in very pretty deeply on Monday. But not right now. We're looking at electric generator emission caps and providing requirements for new clean energy coming into Massachusetts. So we just talked about methane leaks, and then we talked about gas-insulated switchgear. If you add those things up on the far right column, if we do everything that we're thinking about now, we will get an additional 7.3 to 8.2% reduction towards our 2020 goal of 25%. And 4% of that is from the electricity sector, and between 3.2 to 4.1% is from the transportation sector. In terms of the regulations, some of those regulations will satisfy 3D, which is the annual declining cap, but a couple up there will not, because we won't be imposing a cap, and those include vehicle greenhouse gas standards, because those are performance standards and don't impose a declining cap, and then also the clean energy requirements for retail sellers that we're not looking at. So that's an overview of what we're talking about. Been talking about today. This information is all up on our website. What we're hoping to do in this hour is open this up for general stakeholder questions and comments. Is there anything else from the team? Let me introduce the team here from MassDEP. Laurel McKay, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'm Laurel McKay. I'm from our legal office.
I'm Sharon Weber. I'm Deputy Division Director for Air and Climate Programs.
I'm Will Space. I work on our climate programs.
George Garfinkel. I also work on the climate program.
And Christine Kirby, Acting Assistant Commissioner for the Bureau of Air and Senate. Yes, I can do that. Let's start with this gentleman right here.
Yeah, hi. I'm going to go over here so you can hear me. My name is Jan Galkowski. I am paid by and work for Akamai Technologies in Cambridge, and I'm an engineer and quant and statistician there, but I'm not speaking for them, just speaking for myself. Westwood here. So I had three quick points to make after looking through a lot of this kind of stuff. As a statistician, a concern that I have with the overall program is I basically feel strongly that it's very oriented towards an accounting-based kind of thing for the greenhouse gas emissions, like the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Registry, which I know is done with an ANSI standard and there's a protocol. And that kind of makes sense when you have large point emissions. And if you calculate like the cost per megaton of CO2 per piece of information, that it's relatively low because the point emissions have these large kinds of things. But I'm concerned that as you get more spatially distributed with the emissions that you want to account for in your plan to meet the limits of the Global Warming Solutions Act, I think it's very important to seriously look at a way of measuring increases or decreases, hopefully, of emissions over time. And this would be to corroborate what you find in the accounting-based kind of process. There are technologies available to do this kind of thing now, and it's way too detailed to go into here. I have put in written testimony that talks about these kinds of things. I draw your attention to the California Air Resource Board that has a lot of technologies that allow you to do this, and again, the emphasis would be on trying to have a more cost-effective way of assessing your progress on emissions, hopefully more than annually, and see where you are in terms of implementing things. The second point is that this is a very large endeavor. It's cross-agency, has to be cross-agency, includes DOER and all the EER agencies. And I just observed that 20 years ago, when the mercury emissions were being challenged, the staff of DEP was about twice what it is now. And so it would be useful to propose to have additional staff to implement this, and also at DPU and things like that. So I would urge that be done. And possibly you can pay for this by taxing emitters in some way. That would be just a suggestion for doing that. Again, the procedures that are used to account for emissions are very onerous when it's done in an accounting manner, and that's why I want to emphasize emissions. And the last thing I would just say is a general comment that it seems that one part of the government is trying to meet the limits of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and yet there are other ones that are sort of putting things in the way. In particular, there are a lot of new technologies, very exciting technologies that would allow us to decarbonize the electrical sector and do that, and we could solve perhaps a lot of our things if we threw transport into that electrification program. And like the caps on solar, for example, which New York State got rid of completely, are probably something that should go, and whether you have net metering or not is a different question. Is a different question altogether, but that's clearly a way of harnessing new technology and startups, which Massachusetts has a lot of to achieve this kind of thing. So I want to urge you that direction, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Maybe I'll do the same thing. Slide. It seems to me that the Supreme Judicial Court gave you a very difficult job. That the decision they made required volumetric limits, which really is the same thing as requiring tonnage limits, when virtually every policy that you could think of is a rate limit. Right? It's very hard to come up with tonnage-based policies, and that what you've done is try to layer a cap on top of a rate-based policy, and that seems in several cases, right? Am I correct in describing that? Right? You've got rate-based regulations and then put a cap on top of that, which seems to me been a genius way of trying to deal with the problem. My question is, what happens if the rate-based regulation actually doesn't get you below the cap? What's the enforcement mechanism, or how do you address it if you're not actually getting to where you're supposed to be?
I can take that one.
Go ahead.
That's the legal enforcement question. So this is actually something on which we would really like comment. When the draft regulations go out, we're working on crafting the enforcement provisions right now. And certainly if anyone has any ideas here, I know there's a lot of people in the room experienced with this kind of thing, including yourself, or in writing. You know, we'd very much like to see those comments. But I do think that the Kane decision was quite clear. We need to have enforceable volumetric caps. So the crafting of the enforcement response, you know, really needs to be sufficiently robust to incentivize the folks that have to figure out how to comply with what they need to do. So, you know, we're not saying we have a complete solution to that right now, but when you read the draft regulations, it'd be great if some of you at least could focus on the enforcement provisions and give us some feedback on that. That would be a great thing. I mean, we do have a lot of enforcement tools that we have been given by the legislature, but we have to think carefully about how we use them in each of these programs, and we may have to do it a little differently in some of the programs.
Bill has something.
I could just add a concrete example that I think the one that fits your question most directly is the SF6 regulation. And it may help people to understand the whole nature of the problem to describe it this way. Right now in our SF6 regulation, they're required to comply with the rate, but they actually report to us three numbers: the amount of emissions and the total amount of material they have and the rate. So in that particular case, we would just be adding a requirement that an additional one of those numbers, the amount of emissions, be below a certain amount, and then they're required to figure how that happens in the enforcement process. We think can be somewhat similar. For many of the other regulations, it's not quite so simple, but I thought I'd just lay that one out because it's such a simple example of the relationship between a rate and the mass, which was what Mark was asking about.
You can state your name when you come up there.
My name is Debbie New, and as a mother, I'm here as an expert on regulations and rulemaking. And I wonder if would you just hold that for me, and this will be important later. When my 13-year-old daughter came downstairs wearing less than should be legal in Las Vegas, not to mention in 8th grade, I said, back upstairs now. And before the products in our bathroom reached a level that the DEP would consider toxic, I said, clean this up now. Those are my rules in my house. You, our DEP, are charged with making rules for our house, otherwise known as our state, where what's at risk is not only the health and well-being of over 6.5 million people, but also our very survival. We have the same goal: to create a safe, healthy environment for our children. In my house, it's clear who's in charge of reaching this goal. Here, it's not so simple. But today, we have an opportunity to make it clear who's in charge in Massachusetts. Is it us, the people represented by our government and our agencies, or is it the utilities? So I wanted to speak to stakeholder trust and also accuracy, as has been mentioned by some of the other experts in the room. Let's take a peek at the utilities and see if their house is in order. A quick look tells us that they consistently underestimate how much gas is leaking. That's been addressed already. We know about the Harvard and BU studies. The utilities' priority is safety, and yet a recent study that we heard about today found that 15 out of 100 leaks in Boston are potentially explosive. The utilities didn't know that, or they would have had to fix them right away. That's the law. They don't know, and they can't maintain their own infrastructure. We also know about the missing leaks. We heard about that today. And that doesn't exactly inspire my confidence as a consumer and as a stakeholder in having them determine the priorities for setting the rules. So there's more, but isn't that enough for us to know not to rely on their proposals for our rules? Especially when we all know, because of gas leaks, compressor blowdowns, which have been mentioned, and also what we've heard about the chemicals in the gas that they won't disclose. When my utility leaves a message on my front door saying, the time is now to switch to natural gas, wanting us all to have more rather than less. And when my utility, again, sends children who live along a pipeline route home from school with an activity book called Natural Gas, Your Invisible Friend. Yeah, think about that. So, again, I'm talking about stakeholder trust. How can we use their methods? We heard about whatever that is that they put down in the hole in the ground, and it doesn't make sense to the scientists who've done the research and have evidence on better methods of detecting how much methane is leaking. How can we use their methods to meet our moral and now our legal requirement to dramatically lower our emissions? We need strong rules based on research and evidence. We can cut our methane emissions in half soon by requiring that the utilities fix super emitters now. I would make that rule in my house, and we need you to make that rule in our house. My family and all of our families are relying on the rules you set to push our utilities to do better, move faster, and make our environment cleaner. Thank you very much for listening to us today.
Who's next? Anyone else?
My name's Judith. You know how when you burn through a lot of money each month and you pull out your credit card bill at the end of it and you go, okay, what are the damages? Well, we know that when we burn coal, gas, oil, the bill doesn't come in for 50 years. So that what we're seeing now is the result of what we burned 50 years ago. And we've been burning astronomically more. Why we don't have zero emissions as a goal is beyond me. But since we do live in a nice capitalistic society, it would strike me that carbon taxing makes an enormous amount of sense. I know there are a number of different ways of doing it, and I just wanted to hear what you thought about the different styles and what you think might be useful for really an immediate effect.
I can address the taxing part.
The taxing.
Yeah, and just as a legal matter, the DEP is not charged with the authority to create new taxes. That's only the legislature. So that one, we just have to put aside, but the team can talk about other methods.
Right, so under GWSA, our immediate goal, particularly under the Kane decision, is to meet the 25% by 2020. If you were here in earlier sessions, we are actively looking and planning with other agencies for the 2030 goal and ultimately the 2050 goal that gets us to 80% reduction by 2050. So to get there, we have to, what we're saying is electrify all sectors. So this is very much in our minds, which is to the point.
But isn't it a question of how to get that electricity? So if you get your electricity from solar and wind rather than...
Right, and we also talked earlier about the methods that we're using to get there, RPS, more energy efficiency, more clean energy coming into the system, and the energy bill as well.
Are you basically advocating like to electrify because you decarbonize electricity, you cannot decarbonize natural gas or gas you put in your car? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think in the long term, that's where.
The climate plan that was updated earlier this year and the original one that was issued in 2010 both had a strategy of first trying to use the energy we use most efficiently and then trying to electrify everything we can, which will mean transportation, which will mean heating, and then with the remaining electricity, decarbonizing it. So that sort of structure, those, I don't know, tripod if you want to call it, is the general plan. It's not something we invented. This is what most people see as the way to the future to try to accomplish our long-term goals here.
Any other comments?
I'm Larry Rosenberg. For many years, I was a researcher at the Harvard School of Public Health until I retired a few years ago. Now I'm an activist at 350 Massachusetts. I wrote out a comment that I will submit online and give you on paper if you want. I'll try to just do it a little more ad lib right now. Like many people here today, I'm very glad that the SJC decision came down and that we're having this kind of discussion. I'm motivated by the possibility of extreme catastrophe that the International Energy Agency, NASA, the National Oceanographic Administration, the Bulletin of Concerned Scientists have used words like catastrophic and civilizational collapse to describe what we're facing. I think that we should all feel motivated not just by the requirements of the GWSA and the Kane decision, but by the realities that many of us, perhaps most of us, realize that we're facing. And I cited in earlier testimony at the DPU in March specific statements that all those agencies and others made along those catastrophe predicting lines. So I hope that you all agree that this is really an extraordinary situation. I have a number of recommendations for what the DEP should do. The first one is essentially what you're doing. I think that transparency and detail about the exact places you expect to get emissions reductions, how you expect to get them, is crucial. One thing that perhaps was mentioned earlier today but isn't on that chart Because I know right now the DEP says its projections are plus or minus 5%. If it ends up being plus 5% and you're kind of cruising into just the right level by 2020, then we won't achieve those reductions. And because of the delays in reporting, I gather that we won't really be able to know whether we've reached the 2020 mandates until roughly 2022. So it seems to me that the DEP should make clear how its range of uncertainty is taken into account such that the worst case possibility in the projections would still ensure that we meet the reductions that are required by 2020. Second, and you referred to this, I think it's crucial to strengthen and expand energy efficiency and demand response programs. I know that Massachusetts is doing the best in the nation, but from what I gather, there's a lot more that we could do in various sectors of the economy, and I urge you to do that. Third is the question of municipal lighting plants, which are not subject to some of the energy efficiency and RPS rules that other producers are. I don't see why they shouldn't be and why they couldn't be expected to do as well as some of the commercial plants are doing and are being required to do. Fourth, I expect that you're going to get pushback from power generators like, gee, DEP, we've done all this stuff that you required us to do. Why don't you go after transportation and buildings and commercial industrial plants? That's, to some extent, a good argument. All those sectors certainly require and deserve attention. But I don't think there's any plausible way to respond to that complaint without going back to those same power generators and saying, yeah, you've done some things, but we need a lot more from you. And meanwhile, yes, we should address all those other sectors, including the question of gas leaks that was raised earlier. I suppose you're going to hear arguments about how the steps that you're taking are going to increase electricity bills, which may or may not be the case. But the Kane decision on GWSA do not make economic arguments being relevant to the question of how we should make reductions. Obviously, if there are different ways of doing it that achieve equivalent reductions, as a first order approximation, you should take the cheaper one. But the fact that it costs money is not a legitimate reason now to not pursue the reductions that we need. And sixth, I think it's absolutely crucial that we have to move in the direction of stopping all new fossil fuel infrastructure. Meaning no new pipelines, no new compressor stations, no new gas plants like the ones that are under consideration or planned in Medway, Sandwich, and elsewhere. I think every step we take in that direction takes us away from the direction we need to go and allows more gas of the type that is allowing these catastrophic predictions to be accurate, unfortunately. And finally, I think we need to focus, of course, on solutions, including wind and urging that the legislature go beyond the offshore wind mandates that it's called for, more solar, paving the way for solar industry to expand. As I said, strengthening energy efficiency and demand response programs, and if necessary, working for a boost in transmission capacity from Quebec to allow for greater hydro, despite the, I understand, various types of problems that there are in hydro. But I think that if we are to do that, you should be thinking now about less expensive ways of upping transmission capacity, be it underground or underwater. So I realize that the DEP faces a lot of difficult circumstances and very difficult actors in coming to its decision. We are not amongst the difficult actors, but there surely are some. I just think that you should keep your eye on the fact that we are all facing potential catastrophe, and we have to act very expeditiously.
Thank you. Here, here.
My name is Sandy Huckleberry, and I'm here with Mothers Out Front, also from the T-shirt campaign. I guess my question is that there are a lot of us who are activists who are very concerned about this tidal wave of global warming that's coming towards us, and that you guys are all amazing. You have amazing expertise within this bureaucracy of the DEP. And I'm assuming that since you are working for the DEP, you have some interest in environmental issues that brought you there, besides just taking a different job. So, so my question for you guys is to talk to those of us in the audience that really want to make change, and ask you what you need from us. What kinds of things would help you in your jobs? I know that you are in the world of the bureaucracy and you can do the things that you're allowed to do, but you must, through your expertise and dealing with these issues every day, have a sense of a pathway that can be made easier somehow for you to do the right thing. And I'm wondering if you have anything that you can tell us about what we can do to help you do even better.
I think you started the broad theme here. Is our immediate goal right now is getting to 2020, and we are definitely looking for your support and your ideas. And Laurel mentioned enforcement, how we can fashion a response to the Supreme Judicial Court decision, so that we can move forward by getting to the 2020 goals. We also talked about our longer-term goals of 2030 and 2050. We talked about electrifying sectors, all sectors, decarbonizing. So the more that you can give us support for that, I think that we can make a lot of progress. But the other thing
What forms
is,
of support are most meaningful to you? Like that could be like, I say nice things about you when I go home at the dinner table. What does support actually look like in a way that makes your job easier?
it's stakeholder input on processes just like this. When we go through the public process, we ask for your input and we consider the input, and that helps us make recommendations to policymakers and decision makers. So you're looking at the part of the organization where we are technical people, and we make recommendations up the chain. So the more comments that you give us and your ideas, the better equipped we are to make recommendations going on the chain.
And we can do that online or writing letters?
We have a web portal that's open, we talked about earlier. It's right on our website, it's right on the front page. We are asking people to give us their comments, and then we'll take them in written comments. We'll take them through our climate strategies group, and we're holding another session tomorrow, a session next week. We'll be getting into depth on the electricity sector. So to your points, we'll be batting around a number of those difficult technical issues as well.
So this email address that was up earlier, can you put that one back up? That's
Of
another
course.
way to have input, I guess?
Yeah,
Yeah.
climate strategies.
This one here.
Yeah, that's our.
That one will get to us. You could send one directly to Jordan, but this will get to us because we
And
all
that is
check that one.
And that is on our website, where the web portal that we
Yeah.
talked about is, and it gives that deadline also. So if you've been to that website, you can find that
Yeah.
there. It wasn't there a week ago, but it's been added
Yeah.
there. So you have
If
that.
you Google MassDEP and GWSA, the website will come up in the top 3 search responses. That's probably the easiest way to find it if you don't have time to write it down. And written comments are always easy to, show up the chain.
And our
Not that you
website-
shouldn't come and talk to us.
Our
I'm not trying
website,
to
we're
discourage
adding
that.
information as we move along, so I would encourage you to take a look at it more often.
I've heard reference to up the chain twice, and I want to know where the chain goes.
So we have a
I
commissioner
want the
here.
highest level of,
This MassDEP has a commissioner, so he reports to the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, Energy and Environmental Affairs.
so we go on higher,
And then the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs reports to the
and then the
governor.
governor.
I think we also want to take some time for folks on the phone to stick around, because I think if we
Could
may
get
fill up the hour.
questions? Yeah, sorry. Questions and comments from the phone. If you want to unmute your line, please press *6. All right, thank you.
So let's hear from some folks we haven't heard from yet, so we'll start off with Nick Hunter.
I just want to clarify something from before. I'm Alice Arena from the Four River Residents Against the Compressor Station in Weymouth. And we talked about the GSEPs not involving interstate high-pressure pipelines, compressor stations, M&R stations, and things like that. So when you show a figure of reduction of methane, you're showing me the reductions in the leaks, in the streets and things like that. but that's being offset by massive amounts of methane that will be released from these stations. And so right now, Massachusetts is online to get a compressor station in Rehoboth, a compressor station in Weymouth, multiple MNR stations, or actually upgrades and enlargements to MNR stations that already exist. So how does that play into this reduction in methane you're showing if this sector is going up?
So a couple thoughts. If you look in our inventory, there is a accounting for venting in the inventory. It's a very general assessment. It's not at a level of a particular venting station, but it's definitely worth you submitting comments if you have ideas for how we could look at other sectors or within the sector, but other components of the sector. If you think there's possibilities there that we should consider, please submit comments and let us know.
Yeah, absolutely, because we're, extremely frustrated in Weymouth. Sorry, I'm a little edgy because I just got done with a site review with DEP wetlands, which is very frustrating, sadly, because we don't feel as though we're going to get anywhere, with any of this. And the DEP has basically said, well, we're not even going to look at air quality, and there's just nothing happening, and we're under the gun for this compressor station, unfortunately. But frankly, they emit more than they say they do, and they do blow down way more than they say, that they claim that they do. So basically, I'm just going to back up what Larry Rosenberg said, is that the best way to keep those emissions down is to keep these pipelines and compressor stations out of the state.
Yes.
So whatever you can do.
I'm Grady McGonigal with Elders Climate Action. I won't be alive in 2050. My daughter probably will, and her children, if she gets around to having any, almost certainly will be. I've come together with other elders who are concerned to mobilize political action on climate change while it's not too late. We've generated a page of testimony that's been submitted. One of our members has taken the lead on a 15-page paper analyzing the governor's executive order in relationship to what we feel is needed, and we'll present that in Worcester tomorrow, and we'll submit that. Let me just give you a headline here from our thinking, and kind of from an elder's perspective, which is that I know you're focused primarily on 2020. Our concern is that there's too little in the governor's executive order around 2030 and 2040 goals. That to wait until 2030 to say what you're going to require by 2040 is too late. To wait until 2040 to say what's needed by 2050 is too late. There are a number of reasons for that, but just with reference to the different arenas, sectors in which you could apply. Take housing. 2/3 of the housing stock that will still be standing in 2050 has been built. 90% of that is fueled by oil and gas. So there will be a massive retrofitting which is necessary. It'll be too late to say in 2040 what that's going to look like. How are you going to do that? So you can look at each of the areas and work backwards, I think, and have a great deal of concern that even by 2020 you need to do more planning than was publicized. I was heartened by a reference to planning going on to 2030, but I think we seriously need to work backwards from 2050 in order to see what milestones are necessary and make that known by 2020. So I was, as an elder, I was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War, and decided recently that I was a conscientious objector to climate change. So I retired from my consulting business to work on climate change. I welcome what you're doing here, this hearing, the transparency that was alluded to, and for that matter, the governor's executive order, which is a step forward. Just like the Paris Accords, it's a step forward and welcome, and not enough.
Thank you.
Yes, Susan Lees. A short comment. I just want to say that what worries me, in addition...
Susan, can you stand up, please?
What worries me, in addition to the emissions from compressor stations, is that, as we know, there is the effort by Spectra Energy to build a pipeline infrastructure through our state, which will allow those vast frack gas resources of Marcellus Shale to be shipped to come up to Weymouth, through the hub line, up to Beverly Draycott, up to Canada, and shipped to Asia and Europe. So while we are wonderfully thinking about our emissions here in Massachusetts, I think we all also have to look at the worldwide situation and do what we can in Massachusetts to stop that happening. Thank you.
Steve. And then we'll go to the middle and then the back there.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments. My name is Steve Long. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. And I got to say, I'm humbled by all the folks who are here to testify. There are a lot of us in the advocacy community who do this for a living, and you guys knock us out of the park today, so good job. Everyone's asking what they can do to help DEP. I would say there are two things you can do. First of all, DEP has faced huge budget cuts, at least 30%. I worked at DEP 10 years ago, and the staff has been decimated. At the time, I was doing the jobs of 2.5 people, and I think it's even worse at this point. So contact your legislator, ask him or her to support more funding for DEP, so we can have more professionals doing work here, like these good folks.
The governor, perhaps?
Yes, and the governor, right? The governor starts the budget process. Also, ask the legislature and the governor to extend the deadline for these economy-wide regulations. Right now, the regulations sunset at 2020. We want these regulations to be longer lasting, so please ask them to do that as well. So what I wanted to comment on was the role of nature in reducing emissions. And we at the Nature Conservancy see climate change as the biggest threat to nature's ability to support life on this planet. And we also ask, where can nature play a role? And forests and wetlands and soils, when they're healthy, hold carbon stocks. And they also continue to absorb more carbon through carbon cycles. In Massachusetts, our forests absorb 15% of carbon that's generated in Massachusetts every year. Our wetlands and our salt marshes also cycle and maintain carbon stocks. We have 500,000 acres of wetlands and salt marshes in Massachusetts. However, these stocks and these carbon cycles are very vulnerable to deforestation, to land use conversion, and to water pollution, which degrades the ability of salt marshes to retain their healthy carbon cycles. There are salt marshes that are collapsing on the coasts. There's eelgrass populations are down 70% in Massachusetts. So DEP and all of the agencies are now going through a process of regulatory reform, and they're also implementing the climate change executive order, whereby they're reviewing regulations. The work on carbon cycles through nature, through forests, wetlands, and soils, may not add too much additionally between now and 2020, but they'll add up to more in subsequent years. If DEP is opening regulations, wetlands protection, and water quality regulations as part of the EO 562 regulatory review process, please consider the following changes. One, prevent any further infilling or other conversion of salt marshes and eelgrass beds. Recognize the current compensatory mitigation requirements for the conversion of wetlands do not adequately account for greenhouse gases. Please revise them to reflect the best available science. And what some folks call the economic externalities, we can build in apply some economic value for the carbon cycle. work on improving water quality. There's a huge need for water quality improvements in Massachusetts. We have a lot of degraded streams and rivers that are filled with nitrogen and other nutrients. Those can be reduced at the source. And finally, DEP also has a program called the State Revolving Fund that funds municipal wastewater and drinking water treatment. If we continue to use green infrastructure to help purify our water sources, it takes carbon offline and negates the need for gray infrastructure that requires electricity and power to treat these sources. So I know that these recommendations won't add up to much between now and 2020. However, if you do have the regulations on water quality or wetlands open during this time, please consider these changes. I'll submit these comments in writing. So thank you.
So we got someone in the middle.
I had a question about the gas-insulated, oh, I'm sorry, I'm Leanne Canty from Mothers Out Front, and I had a question about the gas-insulated switchgear. I hope it's okay to ask that.
Sure.
I wasn't able to hear it asked earlier. So, given that SF6 is such a potent climate gas, and given its estimated half-life of being in the 1,000+ years, I'm wondering if there's some consideration given to eliminating it as an insulator instead of reducing it as an insulator. My concern is particularly where we're talking about switching more to electricity as a source of fuel, that we're going to need more electricity, we're going to be using more SF6 if we don't eliminate it completely.
We have our SF6 team here, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think often what drives that sort of elimination are regulations that reduce the amount. We don't have a sort of solution to the need for that material in certain places in the electric system right now, and we think the regulations we have are pushing those emissions fairly low, and that utilities have an incentive then to look for substitutions. And it's not something we would do primary research on here, but for example, US EPA has programs that try and help find solutions to for the electric sector and that type of thing. And as we see those come online and we think we can get additional reductions, we would certainly look at that. But we think our regulation now with the 1% leak rate across the sector is sort of state of the art. We'd be the only state other than California that even has that requirement. And as more people put in those kind of requirements, we think that brings about that kind of innovation. So.
Is the California requirement 1% as well?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
So we have a time for a couple more. So anyone else? Okay. We've got two more.
This will be super quick. I just want to say my name is Emily Kirkland. I'm the Director of Organizing for 350 NAS. You've heard from 350 NAS folks. We're a statewide coalition and advocacy group that works on climate. We have 10 chapters all over the state. And I also work with the Mass Power Forward Coalition. You'll see a lot of us have our blue stickers. We're a coalition of more than 150 environmental, social justice, and community groups and small businesses all over the state of Massachusetts. And I just wanted to say that, you know, in my experience being out in communities, talking with people in their living rooms and in church basements and on the street, people are deeply concerned about this issue, and the Global Warming Solutions Act is a law that people are very, very supportive of and very concerned about the possibility that we might not hit the targets in it. So I just want to say, you know, a lot of those folks can't come to a meeting in Boston, but the concern is out there. I know I'm hearing it, and a lot of us who work as part of the Mass Power Forward Coalition are hearing it day in and day out. So
Thank you.
Share that.
So let's wrap up with
Sure. Okay. Betsy Sowers. I'm involved in several of the organizations here. I just wanted to ask a question to the legal person. So I was one of the people who was down at the site visit this morning in Weymouth, and part of our concern is, as people have said earlier, you all are doing this because you care about the environment, is that the regulatory framework gets in the way of protecting the environment. Our experience this morning, we were saying it seemed to be the Department of Empowering Pipelines, because all of the things that we wanted to present were not legally presentable. We couldn't present evidence about emissions that go up in the air and then fall down on the wetland. We couldn't present any evidence that had to do with what would happen if there were an accident at the site, on and on and on. We couldn't, and the question I have is one of the things that has affected this site and others is that apparently there is a legal restriction that says when you want to do projects like this, you can only look backwards at the potentials for flooding. The last king tide, we had water almost up to the top of where this project is supposed to be, but legally they can't look at sea level rise caused by climate change. We can only look backwards at historic flooding. I hear you say, oh, and we talked to one of the lawyers this morning, and he said, well, you could hire an environmental lawyer and take it to court and fight for years and years and years, and you might be able to change something. But it's going to be way too late then. If regulations are being looked at and changed now, what are the odds of addressing some of these things that are keeping people who are wanting to protect our environment from having to do what the fossil fuel companies want?
Yeah, well, I'm not working on that project, so
yeah,
it's hard for me to comment on what the legal restrictions are. But certainly the web portal's open, and if you have concerns coming out of whatever circumstance, I mean, you can submit them through the web portal. We are going through reg reform right now. We do have some of those sets of regulations open, so please comment in writing.
So are there questions from the phone? Sure. If anyone on the phone has a question or comment, I think will be the last chance to address that. If you just want to press *6 to unmute your line, feel free to ask.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for coming. This has been a long day, but a very productive day, and we've heard a lot of great ideas and comments. And this is our first stakeholder meeting, and there'll be more to come. So there's one tomorrow, there's one Tuesday, and as we go forward,
well, there's 2 tomorrow.
Well, 2 tomorrow.
There's
yeah,
a night
one
session.
One in the evening. Yes, correct. But one on Monday, and then as we move forward with draft regulations, we'll be holding public hearings, and looking forward to hearing your input and your concerns and your comments. So thank you everyone for coming.